love the channel and find it useful in becoming a happy retiree. Subscribe today. So much happening in the world of finance, economics, you name it today, to let's call it mega topics. Number one, we've been talking a lot about technology and how part of the story with Whole Foods and Amazon as these two industries getting together, one very old, one very new. Food, kind of old, it's been around for a while. Internet, only been around for a couple of decades, but now as they merge, we are in this world where old industries and new industries collide to create something shaped that's new, and it's impacting our world and it impacts jobs. We talked a little bit about this last week. I did a Facebook Live about how I believe you're going to see destruction of jobs. So Amazon, Whole Foods, this is indicative of a very new industry. And it's gonna destroy jobs. That's the bad news. The good news is you're going to see job creation in this process called creative destruction. So we have new processes, new efficiencies, new intelligence, and jobs will be replaced. But because of that, as the industries migrate and evolve, there are new jobs that will be created. And that's exactly what I think will happen. And that's what I wrote about for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution coming up this week. So check that out in the lifestyle section. But the bottom line here is we've got to talk about this property of what's called the singularity. I touched on this a couple weeks ago, but it's this important concept of technology going so far that it effectively gets unruly, and it takes away. It effectively takes on a life of its own, and it eliminates the need for us. And there's a lot of talk about this, and it feels a little bit like we're in the middle of that because we've seen so much change in just the last half a decade. The other investment topic I really want to talk about is the rise of what I would call a more conservative energy transportation industry. So we're going a couple of really starkly different directions, but they have one thing in common. Again, that goes back to technology. So think of singularity that is all about artificial intelligence and computing power and processing and storage, to in a very old industry, not as old as food, but the energy industry that has now evolved significantly in a new realm of lower oil prices as we've gotten so good at finding crude oil, fossil fuels, natural gas, that it's effectively capped the price. So there's so much supply that it's impacted the industry to the point where we're probably not going back to $100 oil, which seemed inevitable only a few years ago. And it doesn't even look like we'll get there in the next decade just because there's so much supply. We didn't just create a bunch of new oil. We found a bunch of new oil because we're so much better at it. And the whole industry that moves oil, the transportation industry, MLPs, pipeline companies I've talked about for years that are owned, at least I own them, for a relatively significant distribution or yield or cash flow. That industry has evolved tremendously in just the last couple of years. It's been a rough couple. The last 2 years have been bad for these companies and these stocks. Some of them gone out of business. You've seen stock prices drop 10, 20, 30%, 50% in some cases that have rallied back recently. But I want to talk about the rise of a new or more conservative energy transportation industry, which is interesting. So you've got two major things we're talking about today: technology, energy, and really how those two converge in the world. So for here we are we've wrapped up the first half of 2017. It's over. First half of 2017 is in the books, and an eventful year, of course, politically. And I would say politically and geopolitically, the most eventful piece of the equation this year: a new presidency, in new relationships that now our new president has with other leaders around the world. So every single time there's a meeting between us in Canada, us in South Korea, us in Japan, us in China, us in Russia, us in Germany, you hear these headlines because it's, to some extent, it's the first time these world leaders are getting together. So it's this massive political flow of commentary. And then geopolitical, as we continue to struggle with countries like North Korea, that it looks as though the RPMs have been revved up for countries and relationships, or the lack of relationships we have with some of these other countries. But again, a relatively uneventful year so far for stocks. At least uneventful when it comes to big air pockets or corrections. We haven't seen much of that, at least so far this year. For the year, Dow up 8%, S&P 500 up about 8%, the Nasdaq's actually up about 14%. One thing that we've just started to, we've heard a little bit of this throughout the year, and it's picked up just lately. We've begun to hear lots of chatter from the Federal Reserve. So, really central banks around the world. So it's not just the Fed and Janet Yellen. It's also the European Central Bank and Mario Draghi. It is the Bank of Japan. It's all of the central monetary banks around the planet that are adjusting interest rates, which adjusts the value of these currencies. It adjusts what interest rates we pay on bonds. So it's this force that has really been with us, again, since the financial crisis, easier and easier monetary policy, part of which we can relate back to the rise in equity markets. But this week, pretty interesting. So we had we've had another big bank stress test. So all the biggest banks in the U.S. this week, all the biggest banks were cleared. So it was a pass rate. It was a very good pass rate for banks. And the Federal Reserve goes in, and they have been doing these stress tests since the financial crisis, and they all got a pass. J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, Citigroup raising dividends or plans to. They all have plans to raise dividends and increase stock buybacks. So we've got a lot of fundamental. We have had so much fundamental repair in the banking system, and the banking system, as we all know, is the oil or the grease of the entire financial system. So without a banking system that is on solid fundamental ground, then you've got fundamental issues. Right now, we are in a place where banks look as though they might survive for a good while. Interesting comments, though, out of Janet Yellen. And this reminds me of the moment that a couple of years ago when the European debt crisis, which followed our financial crisis here in the United States, Mario Draghi came out and said, we're going to do whatever it takes. And ever since he said that, things got better and better and better in the Eurozone, economically at least. Interestingly, this week, Janet Yellen went on record saying that she doesn't believe that we're going to see another financial crisis in our lifetimes. Quote, will I say there'll never, ever be another financial crisis? That would be going too far. This is coming from Janet Yellen. But we're much safer, and I hope it will not be in our lifetimes, and I don't believe it will be. That's a quote from Janet Yellen talking about, hey, are we going to see another financial meltdown anytime soon? And that's interesting that you'd get that out of the head of our own central bank, the Federal Reserve. And that happened this week. A memorable moment for the Federal Reserve of the United States. Interestingly, because you start to see these central bankers backing off the easy monetary policy, interest rates look as though they're finally starting to go up. So we've seen an uptick in interest rates. It happened this week. Earlier this year, it looked like interest rates were going down to below 2 on the 10-year Treasury. Today, we're all the way back up to 2.3% and potentially headed higher. Hi, I'm Wes Moss, and thanks for taking a minute to hear about what's so different about my new book, You Can Retire Sooner Than You Think. So unlike other retirement books, this book will give you a step-by-step guide, whether you're in your 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s, to learn from what these successful and happy retirees did to get there. I hope you enjoy the book, but more importantly, I know that it'll help you retire sooner than you think.